They say every legend has a beginning. For John Dillinger, it wasn't the crime that made him, it was the punishment. 10 years for a failed robbery attempt. 10 years that transformed a small-time thief into America's most notorious bank robber. In Pendleton, Dillinger learned more than just how to survive. He learned to think like a professional criminal. The prison didn't reform him, it educated him. By 1933, after serving 9 years, Dillinger emerged from prison. But the America he knew was gone, replaced by a nation crippled by the Great Depression. Banks had become the enemy of the common man, and John Dillinger was about to become their worst nightmare. To understand the story of this great legend, we need to start from the beginning. In the summer of 1887, in the bustling city of Indianapolis, a French immigrant named Matthias Dillinger welcomed his firstborn son, John. This seemingly ordinary event would set the stage for an extraordinary life. John, nicknamed Junior by his family, was born into a world far removed from the notoriety that awaited him. His mother's untimely death when he was 5 cast a long shadow over his childhood, and a stepmother and 3 new siblings were added. John Jr. was a restless spirit. He was soon head of a neighborhood gang. School held no allure, and soon John traded classrooms for the thrill of petty crimes. He and his friends stole coal from passing trains and got into various scrapes. It was whiskey and stolen goods which captured his imagination, always eager to charm girls and then get himself into further trouble. He took a job at a plywood factory, then as a courier and then as a mechanic, but they all failed to hold his attention. His father's move to a farm in Mooresville in 1920 did little to change his ways. Hunting and cars became his passion. He was quick with a gun and even quicker with a car, always taking them apart, putting them back together, and taking them for joyrides. The pages of Pope novels about Jesse James became John's escape into a different world. He was inspired by the tales of daring escapes and chivalry, aspects he would later emulate. Baseball, however, was only ever a hobby, and his romantic life seemed to be a series of failures. His uncle's stepdaughter turned down his marriage proposal, and a girl in Indianapolis was pregnant with his child. It was this chain of events that set him on the path of crime. In July 1923, a stolen car, a revolver, and a police encounter led John down a path he couldn't reverse. He narrowly escaped an arrest. To avoid punishment, he impulsively joined the Navy. His stay in the Navy was short-lived. After 22 days, the grueling labor had taken its toll, and he left his ship in Boston going AWOL. His punishment was a fine of $18 and a 10-day stay in a penal cell on bread and water, all of which he ignored. He left his station again shortly after his release, adding another 5 days, and 5 weeks later he escaped for good, prompting a $50 bounty on his head. By April 1924, John had married 17-year-old Beryl Ethel Hovius, but marriage couldn't hold him. The quiet life wasn't for him. He soon formed his first adult gang, stealing chickens. His father, honest and upstanding, was appalled, and the family broke apart. A distant relative of his mother, William Edgar Singleton, became his partner, and together they robbed gas stations. They then targeted an elderly grocer named Frank Morgan, knocking him to the ground and stealing his pistol. Dillinger was caught and pleaded guilty to assault and robbery. Despite his father's hope of leniency, Judge Joseph Williams handed down a harsh sentence of 10 years in prison. This unjust conviction, where all of the evidence was circumstantial, fueled Dillinger's anger and set him on a path of no return. He felt betrayed by the system. "When I get out, I will be the meanest bastard the world has ever seen," he said at the time. The prison, a grim facility surrounded by 30-foot concrete walls, became his new world. He was sent to the infernally hot manhole factory. Dillinger tried to escape twice, adding a year to his sentence. He hid in a pile of shavings and attempted a saw through the bars, but he failed both times. He was also constantly reprimanded. However, prison also offered valuable criminal connections. He met Harry Pete Pierpont and Homer Van Meter. They were men who would later become his partners. He got into shirt factory, where his talent for sewing was noted. He made these new connections, and he was finally ready for the next steps. In 1929, Dillinger applied for a transfer, not for release, but for a transfer to the even more dangerous prison in Michigan City. To everyone's surprise, his stated motive was to play on their baseball team. He was 26 years old. He soon found himself within the same walls as Pierpont and Van Meter. He was sent to a shirt factory there. 3 years later, in March 1933, his family sought his parole, claiming his help was needed on the farm. The parole board turned him down. His family gathered endorsements from well-meaning citizens, even from Frank Morgan and Judge Joe Williams, and 188 people, including his fellow criminal Homer Van Meter, spoke on Dillinger's behalf. 2 out of the 3 members voted to release him, and he was finally free. By the time he got to town, his stepmother Lizzie had died, and on May 25, 1933, she was buried in the same plot as his mother. He joined a group called the Whitecaps. Dillinger was now free, and he was also now changed. He wanted to make money, and he wanted it now. By day, he was an affable and friendly citizen in a white hat. By night, he turned back into a thug. The Whitecaps mostly targeted convenience stores using stolen guns and cars. Their robberies were often poorly planned. One night, they got chased by the police before they even started. Another time, Dillinger broke an old grocery owner's dentures with the butt of his pistol. John soon left them, along with another member named Copeland. They successfully robbed the National Bank in New Carlisle for $10,000. He then robbed the Rockville National Bank. In between, he tried to win the heart of a woman in Dayton who was married to another man. After a fight, a trip to jail, and a subsequent escape, John found himself back on the run, but now with a growing reputation. He would then jump over the counter in Daleville National Bank for a $3,500 score. Dillinger expanded his gang. He and Copeland were joined by an unknown driver and targeted the Montpelier National Bank. He made off with over $112,000. He then rented a series of apartments in East Chicago, scouting new targets. He had yet to attract the attention of federal authorities, but local police officer Matt Leach had him on his radar. Always a step too late, Leach seemed to always get to the scene when Dillinger was gone. He mocked his stutter, wiretapped his calls, and tracked his relatives, but to no avail. Dillinger seemed untouchable. Some speculated he had connections with local police, which he likely did. Dillinger began using the methodical approach he learned in prison. It was all about timing, planning, and execution. He used fast cars and the latest technology. They also began using body armor. Dillinger moved to Ohio with his gang and robbed a bank in Bluffton on August 14th. He was stopped by the new technology of the bank. The safe had a timer. The alarm went off and his gang shot over the crowd as they left. The loot was just $2,100. In the fall, he robbed the Massachusetts Avenue State Bank for $244,000. He was becoming famous, and his acrobatic jumps over the counters and his generosity to those he didn't harm earned him the nickname of a modern-day Robin Hood. He then secured the release of his dear friend Harry Pierpont. Dillinger sent guns to the prison, and his old pals, including Harry Pierpont, Charles Mackley, and Russell Clark, escaped. They walked out the front door using the weapons they had been given. A meeting with his sweetheart Mary in Dayton turned into an arrest, but Dillinger was not one to stay behind bars. He was moved to a jail in the town of Lima. The gang now set their sights on freeing Dillinger once again. They targeted the Lima prison to free John. After bribing one of the guards, they showed up to the prison with weapons. They shot the sheriff and took Dillinger and escaped once again. This was his first violent crime, and a line had been crossed. He was now a cop killer. The public's affection for Dillinger was about to change. While on the run and after killing an officer, Dillinger continued to rob banks with his crew. The public continued to be fascinated. The death of Sheriff Saba was quickly forgotten. The public saw him as a Robin Hood robbing from the rich, but in reality, he just seemed to know how to get away. He then targeted the Greencastle Bank and made off with $75,000. The gang also had a base in Chicago. They were living the high life. They then decided to target a bank in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. They were so good that their methods have since been repeated in movies. They stole 1,000s by drawing blueprints of the bank's floor, timing every move, and making sure every detail is perfect. During the robbery, 2 officers were wounded. They took hostages who were forced to stand on the running boards of their car. After releasing the hostages, they made their escape. The police were unable to identify the car. After Rhinelander, Dillinger was named Public Enemy number 1. Dillinger then took his gang to Florida, where they enjoyed the sun. Before returning to Chicago, and on January 15, 1934, Dillinger targeted the First National Bank in East Chicago. It followed a similar pattern to their other robberies, but this time a police officer, William O'Malley, was killed in the ensuing shootout. He always denied his presence that day, but after East Chicago, Dillinger's reputation began to change. His image as a charming criminal was shattered and replaced with one of a cop killer. This was the point of no return for Dillinger. The gang split after the East Chicago robbery, but were captured in Tucson, Arizona after a fire in their hotel. It was the end for Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark. All were caught, and all were waiting for trial. Dillinger was also arrested. But while they were in custody in Tucson, the authorities were shocked to see their new prisoner Dillinger appear on camera, charming reporters, making jokes and creating his own mythology. He did not deny his crimes. He claimed he helped his friends because they were his friends. He said that he was a poor boy in Mooresville and that his only bad habit was robbing banks. He had become a celebrity overnight. Dillinger didn't wait for the trial. On March 3rd, Dillinger escaped once again. He used what some claim was a wooden gun he made out of a washboard, painted black with shoe polish. Others say that the gun was real and that an expert on the outside was responsible for delivering it. Either way, he took it to the yard and forced the prison workers into his cell. He then walked through the prison halls, locking up officers and stealing their weapons. He stole a car and escaped. This escape was discussed in detail on every radio station from coast to coast. This was more than an escape. This was proof that Dillinger was truly untouchable. Dillinger's escape caused chaos in the banking industry. The police wanted him dead, but the press wanted to know what he would do next. The Dillinger legend continued to grow. Even Roosevelt and Hoover got involved, but to no avail. Dillinger robbed another bank in Sioux Falls, South Dakota on March 6th. With a new gang that included Homer Van Meter and Babyface Nelson, a volatile psychopath. They wounded an officer and got away with more loot. A few weeks later, they robbed the First National Bank in Mason City, Iowa. They didn't make it to the vaults and only got $52,000. Dillinger then decided that he wanted plastic surgery. The plastic surgeon was about to approach the police but got scared and didn't show up to their meeting. Dillinger's friend Eddie Green was killed trying to help him hide. Dillinger, now wounded, continued to be on the run. His girlfriend, Billy Frett, was arrested on April 9th. He also attended a family reunion in Indiana and got involved in a fierce gunfight with the police, and his leg was wounded once again. In May of 1934, the gang decided to hide out in a Wisconsin resort called Little Bohemia. The owner was quick to tip off the authorities. The FBI showed up, a gunfight broke out, and again Dillinger escaped. Hoover got personally involved now. The gang scattered and John Hamilton was killed in the subsequent chase. Dillinger then began making plans to settle down in a foreign country with his latest love, Paulie Hamilton, and even discussed the idea of publishing a book. His last robbery was in South Bend, Indiana, where again he and his gang were involved in a fierce shootout with the local authorities. The wounded were everywhere, including the police. They did get away with $33,000, but the money didn't mean much anymore. The end was near. He began making plans to rob a train. He visited the attorney who had defended him and also discussed his desire to surrender. He was betrayed. Anna Sage, a Chicago prostitute, gave his exact whereabouts to the FBI. On July 22nd, Dillinger was at the Biograph movie theater watching a gangster film when he was killed by FBI agents who had surrounded the building. He was shot in the back. The aftermath was filled with chaos. The public wanted to see Dillinger's dead body. It became an exhibition. The FBI was praised, the politicians were praised, and even those in the medical profession. Dillinger's family went on tour to retell his life, but the main takeaway was that crime did not pay off. But for the public, the Dillinger myth lived on. His gang was either killed or jailed. Babyface Nelson, Harry Pierpont, and Charles Mackley were killed. His family took his body and buried him in Indianapolis, where crowds gathered to see where the legendary figure would rest. His grave has been vandalized countless times. The Dillinger legacy lived on in books, movies, and museums. The man who had captured the hearts and minds of America had finally met his end. In the end, it wasn't science or technology that got him. It was simple betrayal, an old-fashioned method that has been the end of so many. But at the end, the most important thing is that you don't forget to watch my previous and upcoming episodes. Like this video if you dare, share it if you care, and subscribe to the channel to show you're aware. See you in the next episode.